So this particular qualification that we are studying, which is the level 3 diploma in IT, essentially, has 7 units in it. And when we do look at all the units, most of these units have different credits. And because they have different credits, what we should be mindful as a learner is that how much time do we need to spend on a unit which is just 5 credits. So if I look at, I don't know how many of you looked at the, the course handbook, which is also there, but just, sometimes you have to look at putting your efforts in to the fact that, you know exactly what the course entails and what units need to get more attention. And obviously, where you need to actually look at, definitely achieving a merit or a distinction so that it hopefully overall looks at your grade from a point of view of moving into merit or distinction. So there are 2 units in particular. One is this introduction to digital technologies. Obviously, if I leave the words out, introduction to, if you just look at digital technologies, which is 1 unit, which is 5 credits, and the emerging technologies unit is 5 credits. Now, towards the end, when you look at your grading, how do you calculate your grading? The number of credits multiplied by certain points. So if you say, for example, complete this unit with pass, you'll multiply 5 by 3. Any units that you have a pass, number of credits, which is for that unit, multiplied by 3 will give you the points. So if it's a merit, multiply by 4. If it's a distinction, multiply by 5. So essentially for this unit, it's only 5 credits, but depending on how you look at it, two sides to the coin. One is obviously these 3 units. One, introduction to cybersecurity, digital technologies, and emerging technologies are theoretical units. They're easy to complete, easy to complete in terms of evidence for the assignment. So technically speaking, you should be looking at merits and distinctions on these units. The other way of looking at it is sometimes some of these units have what is called quite a few number of learning outcomes. And obviously, when you look at the length of the unit, the content that you need to cover, sometimes you look at it from a point of view of saying, okay, it's got too detailed content and it's only got 5 credits. What I would want to do is basically just pass this unit or, just complete this unit, and I'll focus on the ones which have less content and maybe more credit. So if I look at this particular unit that we are currently discussing, digital technologies, as you would see, obviously it has quite a few learning outcomes, 5, and each of the learning outcomes have between 3 and 4 on an average assessment criteria. So it would be a case in point for you to consider sometimes this as an option, wherein how much time you want to spend and what would be the grade that you get. And even if you get a distinction, you'll be looking at 25 points. Even if you look at a pass, you'll be looking at 15 points. So there's not much of a difference in terms of moving your grade in the qualification. Now, the overall grade also sometimes, if you look at the number of points, just scrolling to get to that. So if you look at, this is where the scoring criteria is. It's on page 13 of the course handbook. This document is on Moodle. This is the first document on Moodle in the journal section. What you'll basically see is between 180 and 215. So there's a play of about, roughly about 35 points. So if you do 2 of these units, which are 5 credits, and you do them with pass only, you're looking at 15 and 15, 30 points. So your grade, ideologically will not be moving. But yes, for some of the other units, when you look at merit, the gap is quite high. So you're looking at about 50, 55 points there. And anything over 270 would be, that means that most of the units, what you'll need to do is score distinctions to be able to get an overall distinction in the qualification. So if I look at multiplying by 5, 50, 50, 51, 50, and you have another 50, 200, 250. And then if you have these 2 with a pass, that means you'll be looking at 15 and 15, 30. So you'll still make a distinction if you see it that way. So that means 4 units you have to get, which are 10 credits with distinctions. And even if you get 2 of these with pass, you would still end up getting an overall grade in your diploma as distinction. So that is what I wanted to highlight just as a start when we look at, doing the assignment. So how much time do I spend? How many number of hours do I spend in terms of, obviously doing the assignment for this particular unit would be something I would be conscious of in terms of looking at what is a credit and would it really affect my grade when it comes to, looking at the overall unit in terms of completion. That's the first point that I wanted to obviously mention. Now, second point that I want to mention, with regards to is the assignment brief. So when you go into the assignment brief, so there are 5 tasks in this particular assignment brief. There is a bit of a scenario which has been given, which says that you've obviously gained some placement experience within ICT organization, and within the ICT department, the IT department manager is now looking at moving the company from heavily based on documents, printed documents and stuff, to digitization in terms of documentation. So the assignment brief with that particular scenario has been divided into 5 tasks. One is planning the strategy. That means the ITC manager or IT manager is essentially asking you to help in planning that strategy. So it starts off with a bit of a presentation. So here's some of the bits related to legislation requirements within the organization, developments in terms of what's happening within the technology sector and how it could affect the organization. Hypothetically speaking, that organization in the long run, in 3 years, which is what he's looking at doing in a 3-year plan, you would need to create as PowerPoint slides. The second part is talking about the digital environment component. So here, what the manager now is saying, that now that we've identified the trends and what is happening in the market and what are the latest trends that we need to incorporate in order to make the organization move towards digital side rather than being manually focused on documents. What he's asking you to then do is prepare proposals which would outline what kind of hardware solutions would be required for the software technologies that you are suggesting that organization should look at moving towards in the next 3 years. So if you decide that the organization needs to have a photocopier with the option of crimping and stapling, along with the option of binding, then in such cases the organization would actually need to buy a photocopier which has the additional component of stapling and crimping and printing option of brochures, flyers, which would mean that they could actually look at bringing that function in-house, and that could be digitized or used or maybe streamlined essentially, rather than using an outside vendor, but can be done internally. You might decide that you would want to implement a wireless network, or say for example, look at upgrading the internet connection or the speed which the company has, say from a normal 10, 20 or 50 megabits to say a lease line of 200 or 300 megabits per second. Then those are bits that you'll have to look at. So in this task 2, whatever you identified in task 1, very briefly as a bird's eye view right now, we're not going into the detail, but just looking at how it flows as an assignment. The second part would be to differentiate them into hardware, software, and network solutions. So if you're suggesting, when you do this first task, you have to look at what is required in the second one. So the softwares need to be planned and bought, or subscriptions need to be looked at. You would need to look at hardware side of things. You would need to look at network side of things, because in the next task it is asking you to outline the type of hardware requirements the company would have, the software requirements, and also the network solution requirements which will be there. Then what the last task is also asking you to do is do an assessment to see what would be the advanced digital solutions the company could look at introducing. As of now, up until now, you need to assume that the organization has been a laggard. That means they have not been implementing IT solutions within the company. So the company is basically a reactor rather than a proactive player in the market. And obviously, what now the ICT manager wants to do as a strategy is that once they transform from being a company which uses only IT for certain things to be able to use IT for most of the operations and functions, but he also wants to look at you drawing up within the presentation that you draw up to see what could be the advanced technologies the company should consider introducing in the next few years. And then there are merit and distinction tasks, which are asking you to elaborate on the network solutions, and one on the hardware solutions. Now, the third task talks about cloud computing. So you are required to produce a 2-page report, and that will cover some parts of these tasks which have been given. The fourth one talks about technology with industry sectors. So here, what the proposal, if you see, you started with a presentation, then you started drawing up proposals for hardware, software, network, and advanced technologies. Then you are coming across to a 2-page report to say, this is how, if we implement or replace this server, hypothetically speaking, you would replace it with a cloud-based server. These are the advantages which could have. Now, in the next task, what the manager is asking, or in the sense trying to do in the organization, is that what he's suggested is that produce an information guide. Now, the information guide is basically a Word document. But in this document, what you're going to do is you're going to produce a document to say, these are the changes which the company will be doing. These are the technologies which the company is introducing. This is replacing the hardware. This is replacing the software. These are new things which the company is bringing. And it'll happen in a phase-wise manner. What the task 4 is asking you to do is actually produce a handout or an information guide, which would be then circulated to people within these departments. So if you say that we are going to be introducing, for example, let's say an example is if you're moving from Windows to Mac, what the company would do at some stage, just as an example, would be they would look at introducing these first for maybe people in the organization, which are people who maybe whose functions are not mission critical. They are probably young and quite IT savvy, or in some cases, these would be things which the company would want to have with the employees which are customer facing. So generally speaking, when you see change of technology, when it happens, or implementation of new hardware which is done within the organization, is normally done with people first or staff first, from an organizational perspective, who are actually customer facing. So for example, people who are in sales, finance, or marketing or business development, account management, they would essentially be getting the new upgrades quickly because they are the ones which actually go out and use some part of it. And in companies like Apple, Samsung, or you look at some of the hardware producing companies like HP, Dell, they normally give their employees who are outward facing, essentially in sales, business development, networking, account management, to actually have the new products first in the company, because they are the ones which go outside, they are advertising the product, they're carrying it, they're showing the usage, and they are obviously also use cases for the purposes of being able to pick up the new technology and obviously start seeding it with customers. So there could be many, many reasons. So what the IT manager is asking you to do is look at one perspective that I explained, is asking you to create what is called an information guide. And this information guide basically outlines the use of technology and how it can be used within these departments. So sometimes you introduce something new in the organization, like we couple of months back did an introduction of an electronic guest log register. So you come in, you sign in on the iPad, a photograph is taken, and it notes that the person has moved in into the premises. When you go out, you click touch and you sign out from your profile. Now, this bit might be useful because we want to use it as a tool to do with paper or a sign-in register. The passes have to be issued, things like that. And the other bit is that it also keeps everything track of electronically. So no paper, no printing of passes. And obviously for fire drills and other things, it is very easy. You can just take that iPad away and, obviously do a quick roll call to see how many people are in, how many are outside. So it speeds up the work. So what we have to do is, the IT will implement that solution, but as a apprentice who's doing the assignment, what the IT manager is doing is saying that you produce a small handout or a report or an instruction leaflet or a guideline leaflet, which will actually tell people how to use this particular sign in and sign out system, because we moved from a manual one, which is register based, to something which is electronic. So here it says you have to include all these departments, but generally speaking, when you do the assignment, I would suggest you include any 2 or maybe maximum 3 departments or sectors to essentially showcase what has been implemented and how the guideline or this document would be essentially used as a guide to be able to use that solution in the organization. The extension activities will obviously then ask you to dwell a bit more into whichever sector you have taken, and it will ask you to define benefits, advantages, disadvantages, or compare and contrast any of the 2 and that you are implementing. The last part of the task is basically implementation. Now, if you see how IT or changes within the organization related to IT are done, the first and foremost part always tends to be strategy. That means creating a document or a planning document. After the planning has been done and sponsored and obviously got approved, what the company would then start to look at is what are the components or bits and pieces required to put that into place. Then they would go into things like evaluating options. And then finally, once they've evaluated the options, before they start actually buying the hardware or the software or start implementing it, they would basically create a detailed guide to say, this is the logic, that is why it was done. And this is how it is going to be used. These are the benefits it will produce. And then towards the end, when they start actually physical deployment, that is what is covered in task 5, which is to say planning and implementation of what you have drawn up as the task 1 to 4 in terms of actual document is going to be now implemented. That means you'll place the IT department will get the finances allocation done from the management. They will place the order. Once the order is placed, the material starts arriving. And once they start arriving, the actual deployment or implementation of that happens. So here, before we even start looking at physical deployment, what you're requested to do is essentially prepare what is called a project plan. That how will you start the implementation? Which department will you start from? Which particular area will you start from? Will it be software? Will it be hardware? Whether you'll start from reception and administration, start with support functions, or start with frontline functions, start with the management. You have to hypothetically think of how this plan would actually come into play. Sometimes you look at, if I give you an analogy here, that imagine if you were looking at building a house. One of the first things that you would do is obviously before you even buy the land, you shortlist and look at a place where you would actually build the house. You will actually shortlist the piece of land. Before you go ahead and purchase it, you'll apply for planning permission. You will ensure that an architect or a builder essentially creates a blueprint. When the blueprint is done, then you get into the costing of it. Then when the costing is done, you start looking at ordering and preparation of it. And then there is a plan or a timeline which is prepared that how would the house be built, even before you start building it and finally ordering the stuff. So you'll start with the foundation, then you'll go to the walls, then you'll go to the plumbing, electrics, and everything. Then you'll go to the roof, and then you'll essentially look at finishing the house. That is how that would be. So imagine the same process now happening with this particular assignment brief, wherein you're looking at now the last stage, which is planning and implementation. So what you need to do is, I've got everything done. I paid for it. I've bought the land. I've got the maps and the architect to prepare everything. Now I want to look at is monitoring of it to see as an owner, how long will it take to build the house? So similarly here, a project plan would be required to create, and that would be an outline of how the things would be implemented from point of view of hardware, software, and networking solutions that you planned initially in task 1. So you could do a timeline, a simple timeline, which could be done on an Excel sheet, which will have 3 or 4 rows. It will have serial number. It will have the main tasks in it, the duration, and how long will it take, and maybe a bit of costing in terms of, if you want to include, and that would basically become a bit of a project plan or a timeline. The second part is, once you've prepared that timeline and a project plan, what you're looking at then doing is basically looking at providing what is called annexures. Now, when you do this kind of a big planning to build a house, there are lots of annexures or add-ons and extras that you will keep adding. For example, the first the first plan which the architects actually prepare is a plan essentially for the house in terms of how it look like. It will be one nice picture, or it will show you what it will look like. But then you would want details of it. How thick are the walls? What paint is it going to go in? Does it have a wallpaper? Where the doors will be? That nitty-gritty of the plan essentially would be, what are called the annexures or expansion to that main plan or the image which has been created, by the architect. So that is something which is the second part of it, to say, you need to have an electric plan, a water plan, or a plumbing plan, or for example, a fittings plan, and they would be add-ons, not substitute. there'll be add-ons to the master plan which has been created by the architect. So here again, you have to assume that after you've done the timeline and the plan, what you need to then look at is create an appendix, which will be appendix for the plans, which will essentially say that, if something is not working or if something has not come in, then how would you need to look at addressing that in detail. So annexures would be typically looking at hardware and software, how they are dependent on each other. If one of the things breaks down, how the other would actually be working functional or need to be made functional. And in some cases, if there is any sort of programming which is required. Now, because we're talking about the IT plan, so here, obviously, sometimes you buy servers, you buy hardware and infrastructure, but they would need to be like network storage devices or drives. When you buy, you need to configure them. You need to install RAID on them. Different types of software solutions need to be installed, like firewall, and in some cases, user policies to be able to give access to users. All that would be deployed once the product has been integrated into the master plan. So those are the two additional subtasks here. And then in the distinction one, obviously it is asking you to elaborate a bit more on what kind of project management tools you would be using, whether you're using Agile, Prince2, or PMP, whatever methodology is being put into place, so that you're able to, because time is equal to quality and cost. So quality is equal to time and cost. Whichever way you look at, these three things are quite important. So when the implementation starts, you buy the hardware comes in. If it's lying in the office for 2 months without being used and installed, then it is going through its warranty period. And if anything comes out faulty, then the company would end up paying for it rather than getting it free, or in the days or whatever has been SLA agreed with the vendor, they might not be able to return that back because it's faulty on arrival or things like that. So those things will have to be addressed in the extension activities, because it will be related to you covering and extending the existing part of the plan or project that you have explained. Now, this is as an assignment brief, you have to look at objectively, because at the end of the day, it has got connected tasks in it. And for you to be able to address, you would need to keep that planning thing or scenario in your mind as you go along and do the task. Now, going back to in terms of how you would look at doing the assignment, obviously, a couple of things that I normally end up mentioning if I look at starting a Word document, and in terms of how I would do the assignment, one or two things that I would like to point out here in terms of structure would be that when you do start the assignment in a blank document, just make sure that you copy some of the things as it is, which are coming in from the assignment brief. There is no rocket science, submitted by, and then obviously you make sure that you send the learner declaration along with it. Now, when you do write the tasks out, if I ask to do the tasks, I would write task 1 planning strategy, and then I copy the tasks which are given as it is from the assignment brief and put them here. Now, the reason I do that is primarily because what we need to be able to do is when we do write the task down, we need to make sure that the evidence is under those tasks. So here in such cases, if I look at these tasks which I put, I would at some stage, create some bits in terms of making sure that these are the tasks that I'm copying, and they are copied as it is from the assignment brief without omitting the command verb, and ensuring that, we identify very clearly each of these bullet points. Underneath that is given which assessment criteria is it. So they're clearly labeled and clearly identified. Now, when we go back into the assignment brief, what we are looking at is primarily looking at quickly discussing in terms of how we would look at addressing these tasks. So the scenario I've explained, read the scenario twice to make sure you understand it. If you're using, let's put it this way, your prior experience, then just use that context of how the assignment has been laid out from task 1 to 5. And as long as you follow the context and replace it with the place of experience or work experience that you have, that would also be fine. So the first task is asking us to produce a presentation. That means task 1 will need to be done as a PowerPoint slide. It cannot be given across on a Word document. So what I would then do in some cases very clearly is, if I look at this as an option, let me open a new slide, and just give me 1 second. And then what I would do is, when I've got the new slide, new presentation opened up, what I'm going to then do is primarily look at the first task, which is planning the strategy. That part, the IT manager has asked you to produce as what is called, a PowerPoint presentation. So what I would then do is basically go in and produce this particular presentation, on the new slide. So let me show that to you in a second. And that is what I'm going to do, because the first part of this assignment needs to be submitted as a PowerPoint presentation. Now, the PowerPoint presentation will have these slides, about 10 to 12 slides or 15 slides. And to explain some of the slides, what you are also going to do is put some speaker notes underneath the slides, so that if there are bullet points that you put, there is some bit of detailing that you have done in the PowerPoint presentation when you have, when you have covered that particular task. So you could do, I would suggest, anywhere between 10 to 15 slides, depending on, what you are looking at. Because there are 4 task criterias, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I would suggest anywhere between, if you're covering, 4, probably about 2 or 3 slides per criteria, and that would allow you to cover, I would suggest, these 4 tasks. Now, if I say and go and look at showing you how this has to be done, this is a sample that I've done with regards to the task. It says developing an ICC strategy, key areas to consider. And what I've done here is obviously looked at these 4 tasks which are copied from the assignment. So one of the tasks was explain the recent technological advances in computing, which is AC 1.1. The second one was suggest an appropriate digital solution to solve a problem. The third one is explanation of a range of ICT related jobs that the organization may require because they are implementing IT. And the last one was explanation of the transferable skills that will be required when people move from manual jobs to computing based jobs. And then what I've done is I've done a first slide, which is primarily just talking about, the first aspect of it, which is AC 1.1. I can label it 1.1 here. And that would tell me as a tutor that, okay, this is my task 1.1. And anything that I want to mention, I mentioned it as a bit of a, speaker note underneath. So because it talks about recent advances in technology in computing, one of the things that I could say is, obviously there are lots of advances which are happening in technology, but AI is the one which is being currently talked about quite a lot. Use of AI in robotics. You can just add one odd sentence here. And then in my case, I have looked at what are the recent developments. There's artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I've created some points here, and I mentioned a few points underneath just to explain the slide. The second one, I think, is cloud computing. The third one is Internet of Things. The fourth one is blockchain technology, which is cryptocurrency development in the blockchain technology leading to cryptocurrency and things like that. And these 4 slides basically summarize AC 1.1. This is 1.2, suggestions for appropriate solutions. And I do feel that in the organization needs to look at implementing AI. So I've created a few slides. We need to look at cloud management or solutions which are cloud-based, things like MS Office, or some of the storage facilities could be cloud-based. And the third is obviously improving efficiency in terms of devices, network, and monitoring would be possible if we implement softwares which are running on the cloud, so that there is very little downtime. So whichever way you want to structure and what you have read is something that you are following through in doing these tasks. The next one is 1.3. What kind of strategy would it help if we do deploy these technologies like cloud computing, AI, and other bits in the organization? How would it help in improving the organization and what kind of manpower or workforce would be required. So when you have this kind of a technology being implemented within the organization, there would be a need for the organization to employ or create employment for people who are going to work as data scientists and data analysts, people who would be able to manage cloud infrastructure or solutions on the cloud. They will be called cloud infrastructure engineers. And then people who manage interconnectivity between devices would need to be network experts. So I've created a slide on that, and I've followed through that theme. I've identified 4 changes which the strategy says need to be done, and that is what I'm following through for hardware, software, and these kind of solutions, as you can see. What kind of skills which the organization would need the employees to develop? That's the next part. And again, each slide highlighting what kind of skills they would need. And then towards the end, what I've done is I've done a bit of conclusion just to summarize these 4 points or 4 assessment criteria which are required to be covered in the presentation. So this would become, when I save this, this would become, task 1 presentation of the assignment, and the reason why this is important is because in the assignment brief, if I go back, it is being asked for us to be able to produce task 1 as a presentation very clearly, and that would do the first task. Now, in the second task, any questions on this so far?
No, Mr. Rahman, everything is clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next 4 tasks that we have to do are going to be Word documents. So for example, in this case, it talks about you producing a 2-page proposal, and that proposal should outline these 4 criteria. Along with that, if you're looking at attempting and gaining merit and distinction, then you have to attempt all the merits and distinctions wherever they are in the tasks which are given. So here, the main part that we are looking at right now is talking about how do we look at creating a proposal. Now, it does say that you need to look at a 2-page proposal. The idea of the 2-page proposal essentially is to understand what are the changes that you are going to be suggesting from an organizational perspective on hardware, software, and the network part of it. That is the main bit that you have to, essentially look at. So in such cases, what I would suggest is that what we need to do is start with a document. That is the same Word document that I created earlier. And in that Word document, what I'm going to do essentially would be to go into the task 2. And in task 2, I would copy them as it is here, put them into the Word document. And what I would do is then create a bit of evidence in terms of how I would outline these types of hardware solutions. Now, if I take some clue from how it has been recommended, from a point of view of, the presentation I've done and the task which is being asked for in terms of, I would say, the assignment brief, I would basically divide this into 4 parts first. The first part that I would look at would be just the hardware solution, right? So let me put this across and I'll share my Word document now so that we are able to address. So if you see the Word document, what I'm trying to do here is, because it is asking me to create a 2-page, proposal. So what I've written is proposal for digital environment components for ITC strategy. And I would write the name of the organization here. So I would need to think of a charity or something, because say, for example, I'm working for, say, volunteers, whatever name you can think of. So I will think of, say, Vertico Limited, just as an example. It is being prepared by me. So I will write down my name, because what I want to do is prepare this proposal, which I'm going to present to the ICT manager. And then what I'm going to also do is put a date, that today's date, for example, or whatever date you want to put in, the date on which this proposal is being done. Now, I'm presuming that the organization this is where I need to use a bit of imagination. I'm saying we are an organization which has 250 staff, and that staff works across different departments within the organization. So we have, and the reason why I've taken 250 is because when we go to the later part of the task in task 4, it talks about business, HR, finance, marketing, those. So the idea is to have that developmental feel in terms of having departments. So business, education, finance, manufacturing. So choosing one particular sector, and one particular sector in that I've said that okay, the company has that many staff, and then what I use is my imagination in terms of what kind of hardware devices which the company would need, depending on the type of people working in different departments within the organization. So laptops and tablets, desktop PCs, smartphones. Sometimes you see companies give phone and laptops to employees who basically are involved in sales, marketing, business development because they go out. So you're going to highlight what is the hardware devices which the organization is going to use. Some of the peripheral devices, this could be pen drives, things like printers and, additional, say, for example, sometimes what happens is that most salespeople in the organization get a laptop. They get a 12-inch or a 13-inch small MacBook or a laptop, but essentially when they come into the office to work, their laptop screen is too small. So what they would then place is a request with the IT department to say, can I get an external 32-inch monitor? So they will connect their laptop to the monitor in order for them to be able to use that more effectively and efficiently when they are working within the office. So in such cases, you would have peripheral devices. They might have a requirement of a printer, and those are things that you can think of. And then for storage purposes, most of it today in terms of software is cloud-based. Sometimes you have to give people within the organization things like hard drives that, say, for example, we also have, and that allows you to carry some data, presentation, folders, videos, which normally sometimes are required by salespeople to actually showcase to clients outside. So you have to use a bit of imagination here, and because it's a proposal, you have to look at what hardware solution or proposal is what you are suggesting to the organization to budget for, and that is what needs to come here. Now, when I look at software, so the second part of the assignment part talks about second task is software. Now, if I look at today, MS Office, most organizations are either using Google Docs or Office 365. Most organizations are using CRM, which is a connected system, allows relationship management to happen with clients, customers, but at the same time, everybody has the same dashboard. They're able to see the customers and interact. So you could look at some of these solutions which the organization might need, and they would be from a point of view of software solutions. Then it goes to networks, and what I would do in the case of networks would be to look at basic solutions like we might need to upgrade our routers because our routers are 802.11b, which is a slower frequency router. We have number of employees in the organization. We might need to implement the N or NG kind of wireless protocol. So you'll have to think of what the organization will need to upgrade. Sometimes you see that organizations have lease lines, but these lease lines are on mobile phone spectrums like 4G and 5G. But if you're on 4G, you're restricted to 100 meg. But if you move to 5G, you're no longer restricted, but your speeds could be up to 1 gigabits per second, and that is what the companies would look at. You could also have a finance, appraisal in this to say that okay, we are using mobile broadband in the organization in a branch office, but that is expensive because it is capped in terms of data. And when the data limit is exceeded, it starts to bill us at £10 per megabyte or something like that. But in such cases, it'll be useful and beneficial for the organization to implement a WAN or a wide area network between the two branch offices, or take up another lease line in that office. And that is what would be covered under, wireless or network solutions. And then if you're going to think about asking the organization to implement some advanced digital solutions, now most machines and most software in the organization is currently, shipped in as installed software. When you buy from vendors, you'll buy a number of licenses for operating system and for Office and some other software. But it is going to be easier for the company to deploy, I would say, such software which is going to be subscription based. So if a number of employees join or if a number of employees leave, then the subscriptions can be decreased, and that would be helping the company saving costs. So here, things like I've used the option of how UK Versity uses a chatbot on its website, which could also do away with a lot of interactions which are required to be done with people, because the chatbot answers a lot of questions for customers. So these are kind of things that you could suggest, in this particular task, which is talking about assessment of advanced solutions which the company could need. So you might say that the website needs to be integrated to CRM like we have done, and the website has a chatbot or the ability to be able to have a live chat. Those could be useful for the customer and beneficial for the company. Those are the bits that you have to recommend, in this particular task. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
No, thank you. Yeah.
So that helps you cover the task 2, of the assignment brief. Now, the next task that we are looking at in the assignment brief, task 3, talks about, using cloud technologies. Now, again, there is a bit of a background and a scenario given that the ICT manager is considering the use of cloud-based technologies to replace all physical storage methods currently used in the organization. You're again required to produce a 2-page report. And when you say you're required to prepare a 2-page report, these are the tasks that you're looking at covering in that 2-page report. Now, let's go back to the assignment brief, because when we do look at these task-based approach, we are going to do the follow-up in terms of what we've already said when we talked about these hardware, software, and advanced solutions which the company would need to implement. So here, if I look at the description of the type of cloud-based system, so one of the things that I recommended to the organization initially was that we want to look at implementing Office 365 or a CRM or a chatbot. Those are things that I can reuse essentially when I start doing these particular tasks. So here it is asking me to do a report, and what I would do essentially with that report, if I shift you back to the Word document, just to show you briefly. So go back to the Word document. So I've copied these 4 tasks as it is. The first talks about, because it is talking about a report, so what I'm going to do is basically do a bit of a report here first in terms of a report format. And when I do this report format here, this is just the bit which is covering the first part, type of cloud-based systems, right? To give it that feel that I'm producing a report, again, I would write, what to follow the same organization, write my details so that, it looks and feels like a report. And then I would describe what are the kind of, cloud-based, solutions the company could employ. So things like Google Drive, instead of physical storage, pen drives, hard drives, I could look at a company moving to a SharePoint or a Microsoft or a Google platform, which would allow us to actually store documents or information online. Now, whether you deploy Dropbox, OneDrive or Google Drive, whatever it is, but this is a proposal as of now being developed. So you're writing what the company could actually do. So I've said storage devices, which is something which I've taken, from a hardware point of view, which has been given here. When I talked about, devices, one is the devices which will be used, the other is servers and storage. So I've expanded this part of the storage into the different types of storage devices which the company could actually look at, right? Then the second part that we want to look at is benefits of, what are the benefits of the cloud-based solutions? I need to talk about what are the benefits. Benefits, if you try and visualize what are the benefits or why people are looking at it, is that cloud-based systems allow you to get access to data from any device anywhere in the world. So the benefits that we are looking at essentially of cloud-based systems are quite a lot. One, you do away with maintenance. You do away with the physical cost of hardware and the maintaining of that hardware within the organization. You get access to that information anywhere, anytime, across the board, across the platforms, whether you're in Manchester, outside UK, traveling, you'd be able to get access to it. Anything that you store and update and retrieve is done in real time. That would allow for real-time collaboration and the most updated information to be available. Even sometimes when we send information on emails, if you see, email-based information can also become stale or old. But if you're updating an Excel spreadsheet or a Microsoft Word document or a quotation or something that is being stored on the cloud, that would be the most up-to-date version because you're retrieving it from there and you're saving it there. And that would allow your colleagues or other people related to the department to be able to, access that information, get that updated part of the information in real time. So those are some of the bits that you could, highlight in terms of benefits. The next one, it talks about assessment of risk. Now, having cloud-based or everything in the cloud is very good, but there would be certainly some part of risks that you have to think of, which will be associated with that. Now, what could be one is that in the previous decade, most organizations preferred to have their data within the organization. They wanted to store it within the server. The server was also within the same physical premises. Now, one of the drawback was that if there was a fire, if there was a disaster, if there was flood, the entire hardware would have been, destroyed, and they would have to spend good amount of money to be able to recover that data. Now, the flip side of it is that if you store now everything on the cloud, that means your data is not in your control. You don't know physically where the location of the data is, and it can be hacked, it can be accessed. If the access coordinates are leaked or provided, then that data can be easily hacked by, or people who are not authorized to get access to it can get access to it. Now, thinking of such areas of why one is we put on the cloud, that means we put the data in somewhere in the cloud, but what are the risks associated with it is what you need to look at. So when you look at Facebook as an example, when European court ruled that Facebook cannot store user data of European users in the US servers or elsewhere. So they made it mandatory. They introduced a legislation called GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and that was an update to the Data Protection or Regulation Act in most countries. The reason why I did that was that the information related to European Union users or people based in Europe should be staying within Europe. So they then mandated through that regulation that data cannot be stored outside the EU if it is related to European nationals. So in such cases, that was a major step, but that step essentially allows breaches not to happen, identities not to be stolen, although it can still happen within the European geography, but at least it is in the control, and it cannot be, that the hardware and software is totally outside and not within the control of the European Union or the countries themselves when they look at storage of data. So here you could look at risks that can be identified in terms of data breach, in terms of, for example, stealing or misuse of identity, in terms of identity thefts, and other bits related to error and misconfiguration which can happen. Now, assuming if the cloud server is down, nobody can use that service. That could be one of the risks. So in such cases, if your email is down, sometimes it does happen. When we come into the organization and the email server is not working, then we have to speak to the engineer remotely, raise a ticket. They have a look at it, and then they bring it back online in a couple of minutes or in an hour or so. But till such time, you do not have any, you have time which has been spent, productivity which has been lost. So those could be risks which the companies can face if they put data or entirely all the solutions primarily on the cloud. And that is what you have to briefly look at when you have to mention it here. Now, the next point is also talking about, it's a 2-page report that the ICC manager asked you to produce. What he's also asking you to do is, in that report, actually talk about what are the security measures that you're going to propose that the organization actually implements as far as maintaining the data and security of the information is concerned. So things like security measures, you have to think of 2-factor authentication, certain backup procedures which backs up data every Friday or every weekend. You look at things which are related to access systems. That means certain staff will have access to certain information. For access, you would require a username and a password. And if you need to look at further information, further authorizations would be required. And in some cases, when data is stored, you're also looking at encrypting the data. The encryption of the data essentially is going to be, using some sort of, obviously putting place things like firewall in place, or looking at software which will essentially be looking at encrypting the data when it is stored, and that would require decryption to happen when the data is being accessed by users, in order to add another layer of security to that data. That is something that you would need to look at mentioning. Say, for example, one of the practical things which we do in the organization is passwords are requested to be changed every 72 days for email or any other logins that you have within the organization. You are mandated to make sure that if you have a mobile phone and a laptop, it is password protected. Some of them require VPN access. Some of them 100% have biometric access, so that if you end up losing it, at least the information from those devices cannot be easily recovered. And that would be then looking at, the task, essentially 3. Any questions on this? The next one is called technology within industry sector. So here, what the assignment brief is saying, because you're assuming you're working for a charity, you need to ensure that the digital technologies that you are introducing are actually relevant, for the users within the organization. Now, here, what you have to do is look at choosing one particular sector. If I take you back to the presentation and the bit. So task 4 talks about, technology within the, say, industry sector. You have been asked to produce an information guide. Now, information guide that you've been asked to produce, you have to look at producing it for one particular sector, either business or education or information. You can't do for all, right? Don't be fooled by the fact that a lot of bullet points are mentioned. You have to use one sector that you're comfortable with. So if I look at using it for my own purposes, I would look at basically creating a bit of a guide. And this particular guide that I'm going to do is I'm going to use it just for the business sector. So I'm not going to use, or I would produce it for education in my case, because I can easily, give more or less, elaboration on it because of my experience and obviously my knowledge. So in my case, if I go back to the Word document right now, what I've done here is I've said, okay, this is an information guide which is being asked to be produced. What is the purpose of this information guide? It is given in the assignment brief. It says your information guide outlines the use of technology and the strategy that is going to be introduced in the organization. So here, what I've done is I've used that same bit to repurpose it as a purpose. And then I have used business sector and I've used education sector. You will only use one. So in my case, defining it, I've only done a few bullet points, but I need to go into detail because we are not solving or doing the entire assignment. I'm just showing you how you would address it. So I would take education sector and I would say, okay, technologies that I use in the education sector within the organization are going to be implementation of VLE, which is a Moodle platform that we use. Now, we are not going to use all of them, but we use Moodle. Then I'm going to say that what are the other e-learning tools and platforms we use? We use webinars, but we do it through Zoom. Right? We have video recorded lectures, and we do not have interactive apps. So this is a plan that we want to do for UK Versity in the future. But we use these two right now. So I will elaborate on this bit more because it's an information guide. So how to use the Moodle? I have I don't know whether you've seen on this, if you have gone on to what is called the, the general course information, there is a Moodle user guide that we have created. And that Moodle user guide is a guide which gives you an idea that, will be required essentially, for, to be produced for this task 4. So if I say Moodle and if I say e-learning platform, there is a small guide that I have, which I produced, for, let me show you, for learners. And in my case, my learners are essentially, students. So this is a 2-page information guide that we produce for the learner management system, and it's called the Learner Manual. What is Moodle? How do you use it? Where is navigation? What kind of documents you see? What is it used for? And all that stuff is actually highlighted in this information guide. This is actually task 4. So you would look at one particular sector, and within that sector, what you would essentially then do is look at, producing this particular guide, and this particular guide is going to be a Word document essentially, right? So I have put only 3 bullet points in my side, and what these 3 bullet points are: one is virtual learning environment, the other is, webinars and other kind of software. And what I've also done in my case is, the third point which I put is student information system, which is a system that we have. Now, there are user guides for each of them. We had a user guide in terms of how to use Zoom, and that is, sometimes we do send it across to the users, to say this is how you're going to use Zoom essentially when you join the let's say sessions with us. So this is something that we have done primarily because we want to make sure that students are aware of how Zoom is to be used. So this would be the detailed document that you will end up producing to showcase and do your task 4. So this is a guide that we produced for Zoom, which shows how Zoom is to be used. You don't need any subscription. How do you register? Things like that. And this one is done primarily to provide it as an information guide to our learners who are essentially using, Zoom for the purposes of joining the webinars and obviously, studying with us. So for task 4, you would need to produce some sort of a document which mimics what I've shown you as Moodle guide and what I've shown you as, Zoom guide. But because there are lots of things which you can do, I would suggest that you have to look at, tailoring it down to 2 or 3 things which are going to be very, very specific that you can actually use and then provide, as a part of evidence for, your, task 4. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So let me just put this across. Okay. Now, that brings us to the last task, which is planning for implementation, which is task 5. So when we look at planning for implementation, as I followed it through with a bit of a discussion on scenario, what we have to do is here produce what is called a project plan, which is to say, if I was in the management, what I would want to see from the manager or the staff is that I would want to see what is called a plan, or at least a bird's eye view of what the plan would essentially look like when it comes to, if I say, yes, let's go ahead with this, then what I would want to know is what kind of a document I would have that would allow me to review everything and see everything that is actually working as far as, planning is concerned. So there are, again, 3 tasks in this. One is an outline of the plan. Second is the stages of how the implementation will happen. And then explaining me in a bit of more detail, which is telling me why is this planning important for the organization, so that everyone understands. I have it in my head. I know that, okay, I'm going to do it. This is how this is going to be done. But what I want to do is basically get some understanding of it, in writing, that this is how this plan is going to be put into place. This is why it is going to be relevant, and this is why it is important for everyone to understand and see this plan from that point of view. So when I do this at my end, I will obviously look at a couple of things. So first things first, again, looking at Verto Limited, putting my name down, because I want to produce it as a project plan, which has been asked for. So I will give it that look and feel. And what I would then do is basically start with the outline of the plan. So when I do the outline of this plan, what I want to do is, in project management, there are 8 different methodologies. So, but I'm going to use the waterfall model, which is going to be quite useful model for, project implementation of this type, which is in IT. So I would basically explain the waterfall model. The reason I've chosen the waterfall model is that if I look at bringing a picture in of the waterfall model, what you will generally see in this methodology, okay, I've got it here. This is how the waterfall model actually works. And the reason why I've chosen this particular model is because this model allows me to deploy and test everything before I move to the next step. So the 5 stages of waterfall method is: 1, you've done the planning, which is the presentation. Second part is basically looking at devising all the different types of solution, hardware, software, network. The third part, this actually is in the last as of now, but the third part we have done is we've looked at how this will be helpful for the organization internally. And then we went into looking at specifically elaborating the solutions for the sector that you have chosen. So in my case, I looked at education. Now we have come to the implementation. So implementation part of it would typically mean that when we do deploy this particular solution, we know what we are putting forward. It's not the horse before the cart or the cart before the horse. We know exactly how this will work because we've trialed it out, we've tested the softwares out, we've tested the hardware out, and obviously that is what the IT department does if they are implementing something to move the organization from one step to phase to the other. So in some cases, it won't be that they will buy 500 PCs or start working on this. They will buy 1 or 2, first see, install, run, and debug and check if it is meeting the requirements, and then slowly and gradually they will start ordering. So here, the deployment or the process that we're going to use is obviously first clear objectives and scope, defining the budget and timeline, because I have to take the budget from the management. Then obviously look at stakeholders, where in which department, at which employees will actually start picking up or becoming, taking up that particular technologies. As I mentioned, sometimes it's the front office staff, reception, people in sales, business development who would get that first. Then I would look at, obviously, we've done some risk assessment and talking about it. So if the staff is not happy with the device, the performance is slow, their learning curve is too high, they find the device to be operating, to operate the device, their knowledge should be very low. Those are bits that we have to factor in into the plan. And then the documentation that has been asked to be produced, which is a 2-page information guide, is the documentation and a formal sign-off that you're doing as an IT department guy, saying, okay, we've implemented Moodle now in the organization. This is the Moodle guide for the students. This is the Moodle guide for the teachers. You should, and we'll give you some basic training, but after that, you should be able to start using it on your own. And that all would be actually covered in what is called the, project planning timeline part of it. The second is the stages of development process, which is what it is asking. How would you start the implementation? This is where you are actually going to, again, give out some steps. So the first part, normally when you look at doing the assignment, is we started with preparing a strategy, then we went into a bit of planning, then we went into a bit of testing, then we are going to go into a bit of risk assessment, and then finally implementation. That part is something that you need to explain using this particular step, 3-4 step. I have written in detail because I borrowed it from a project planning template that we have, and that basically is a template for waterfall model, looks at if the organization is to bring something into the organization or change some system, these are the steps that they will need to go through. So some part of it, like build and install, when you buy PCs, the IT department will get the monitors, they have to open it up, they get the hardware, they have to install the operating system, they have to update the basic bits in terms of the hardware, the firmware. In some cases also updates to the operating systems have to be applied, network updates have to be done, Those are the bits that you are looking at, visualizing and putting it together. The last part is explaining why this planning is important. Why are we doing this project plan? Why are we taking this structured approach? This is what you need to explain to the management, that because there's a lot of money at stake, there's a lot of risk in terms of moving the organization to move from manual paper-based to IT-based systems. There could be a shift, which could mean that employees within the organization could get consumed. That means they have to spend a lot of time, actually doing or learning some of these things. So you have to give a realistic time frame of why this is being done, but you have to explain the importance and the benefits of this planning. So it could be done in whatever language, whatever way you want to explain, maybe a couple of paragraphs, but that would be justifying why the organization is moving from manual paper-based systems to IT systems. Is that okay? So this would be then the discussion in terms of how you would look at doing the assignment for this particular unit. And towards the end, don't forget to add references, because there is lots of data that you will take from websites or books and places. My suggestion would be, for example, in my case, like I've looked at the project management part of it, waterfall model from this website. When I talk about cloud-based solutions, I've looked at Microsoft's website. If I do talk about, for example, why digital transformation is required in the organization, I've looked at the BCS, British Computer Society white paper. And then when I look at different types of hardware and software, what I've done is I've looked at one particular company in particular, which is Computer Hope, which actually did move from manual systems to IT systems. And they looked at planning differences between hardware, software, what are the best things to do. So those are bits that I have actually looked at in general, for the purposes of, referencing this as far as my work is concerned. So make sure that you put at least 6 references towards the end in your assignment, because this is what would be definitely required. Although this is a very practical assignment, simply because of the fact that, it is asking you to assume the role of that apprentice. And then within the particular charity point of view, it is asking you to essentially, accomplish a certain number of tasks. And these tasks have to be done as if you are actually planning this in a live organization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Or basically
will you be able to provide us with the sample?
Yes.
As usual, yeah.
So this presentation, which I've shown you, and obviously the bits and pieces that you have got to see in this particular document, this is what I will provide you, as a reference example that you can, look at, on your side for the purposes of, doing your own assignment. But this is like a bit of a outline. It is not something that you'd be able to, straight away or just use literally, but this is to be used as a bit of an outline, because at the end of the day, this is only giving you a bird's eye view in terms of how your assignment for this particular unit would essentially, look like. Okay?
Yeah.
Good stuff. So I will share this across with you in a couple of seconds after the closure of the session. And what I would then suggest is, if we move you back to the PowerPoint, so you should be looking at making a submission, within say 2 weeks. And that could be just making sure that the plagiarism and the AI part of it, is something that is less than 20%. Because at the end of the day, what you need to be able to do is, when you do submit your assignments, they need to be your own, and they need to be referenced, they need to be paraphrased, and just making sure that these are your own pieces of work and we will be obviously required to scan this, from a point of view of AI and plagiarism, which has to be less than 20%. Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions on this, Clement and Shaima? Any questions?
No.
Promise any questions at your end? So, two parts to the document that you are going to be looking at submitting. One part is obviously related to, the what do you call PowerPoint presentation, which is basically for Unit 1. And then the other bit is going to be related to your tasks 2, 3, and 4. And tasks 2, 3, and 4 are going to be 2, 3, 4, and 5 essentially are going to be a Word document. But obviously, the idea of asking you to produce a repository, so say a 2-page report or a guide, is primarily done to ensure that you are using it for the purposes of developing soft skills as well, because that is what most IT people or IT personnel are required to do at some stage when they essentially look at doing or producing some output or documents. So that is pretty much it from my end, and I would send this across and share this with you in a couple of minutes. They'll also go up on Moodle so that you have access to them through the Moodle as well. But if you think of any questions or if you have any queries, feel free to drop me an email, and I will try and come back to you on them pretty much straight away.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Rahman.
No worries. Okay,
Okay,
guys,
have a nice
take care. Thank you for attending the session, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye. Bye for now.